All right, well, hello everyone. Welcome to our program, Beyond the Library presents MicroAdventures in Massachusetts. My name is Helen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Beyond the Library and the Cary Library's Museum Pass program is sponsored by the Friends of Cary Library. Cary Library has 23 discounted passes to a variety of wonderful places. This program will be recorded and posted to the library's YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A, and Alison will answer them at the end of the program. Now I'd like to introduce our guest. Alison O'Leary is a Massachusetts native, longtime journalist, and author of several nonfiction history and outdoor books. Alison is an avid outdoor explorer, as you will see when she starts her presentation. Welcome, Alison. We are so excited to have you share your micro-adventures.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope everyone is having a great summer and looking forward to ending it with a bang. And right into the fall, hopefully there'll be a little more dry weather and some beautiful foliage to enjoy as September starts to ramp up. There's so much still to see and do in Massachusetts in the fall. A lot like the summer, just not quite as hot. I'm the author of a couple of outdoors books, including Best Day Hikes Near Boston. I think your library probably has a copy of this. It always gets blurry. It's a book of 60 different suggested short hikes. And even though it says Best Day Hikes Near Boston, the hikes actually stretch from Cape Ann on the North Shore all the way out to Wellfleet on Cape Cod. So they're not necessarily near Boston, it's just Eastern Massachusetts. Another book that I've done is called Inns and Adventures. I have to get my face near it, I think, for it to, Inns and Adventures. And it's about traveling and adventuring and doing outdoor fun things throughout New England, New Hampshire, Vermont, the Berkshires. So I pulled all of that information together to talk about micro-adventures in Massachusetts tonight. And I'll start by sharing my screen. The good thing about micro-adventures is that they don't require a lot of gear. That a day trip or a micro-adventure, you don't have to carry all the stuff you see in this picture. This was kind of crazy, overload, way too much stuff. If you're going to go kayaking, just take the kayaks. You don't need the kitchen sink too. And hopefully this program will give you lots of ideas, because Massachusetts is just full of so many awesome places to go and explore. And I like to start by just defining what is a micro-adventure. I like to think that it's something a little bit out of the ordinary, something beyond what you would normally do. So if you're in Lexington, you know, a walk on Battle Road is fine. Or, I don't know, a trip into Concord, sure, that's just an hour or so, right? You're not gonna spend the whole day doing that. But if you decide to go halfway across the state to see something you haven't been to before, that kind of gets you excited, you know, it gets those butterflies of anticipation fluttering in your stomach. Takes a little bit of planning, and yet it's close enough that it can be a little bit spontaneous. So make a break from the usual and try a micro adventure. This program is designed to give you some of the tools, as well as make a lot of the suggestions of specific places. So the tools to design your own micro adventure and suggestions of specific places within the state where you might want to go. I always encourage folks to have a GPS tracker on your phone. There are a number of different ones available. Many have a free version versus a subscription version, but I can tell you the subscriptions are very inexpensive. Gaia GPS is one that I frequently use. It allows you to download maps in advance. So if you're going to be in a place where there is no cell phone coverage, it's great to have the map so that you can follow your route. Gaia has a free version. The subscription is only $20 a year. So I go ahead and get the subscription. That way I can download maps if I'm going to Maine. I've downloaded maps for Alaska, for hiking in Colorado, wherever. It's all at your fingertips. It has a dual use. When you're doing your back to school shopping in those enormous mall parking lots, you can actually use this GPS device to find your car after you come back. And when you're done shopping, you're exhausted, you can't remember where you parked, you can track yourself back to your car. And they can be used on airplane mode so that you're not burning up your battery. That's just my first suggestion. Now, Massachusetts is, as I said, a wonderland of opportunities, particularly outdoors things. And even though it's a small state, we give the big states a lot of credit. Like, who doesn't want to go to California and go hiking or, explore the coastline? But at 190 miles east to west and 115 miles north to south, Massachusetts really packs in a tremendous amount of opportunities to get out and do things. 25% of the state is preserved land. Much of it is public access preserved land. So many different state parks and state forests and wonderful natural assets for us to explore. State parks alone, there are over 450,000 acres of state parks, 29 different campgrounds, 2,000 miles of trails, 87 beaches, and 145 miles of paved bike and rail trails in the state. Now, if you take a look at this map that I have on the screen, each one of those green dots is a state park. This is an interactive map that you can find on Wikipedia under Massachusetts State Parks in the right-hand bar of the Wikipedia page. When you run your mouse over any one of those green dots, it pops up a little box that tells you a thumbnail amount of information about that state park. For instance, I used my cursor over the very lower left-hand corner of the state out there in Mount Washington, the furthest you can get toward the New York-Connecticut line, for Bash Bish State Park, which is the highest waterfall in the state. It's 40 feet, nothing extraordinary by Yosemite standards, but still, it's our very own waterfall. It's quite beautiful. I've been out there. One of my daughters went to camp out there for a long time. But if you mouse over that little green dot, it gives you this little pop-up box that tells you about the state park. And then you can click on the box and it will open up a whole page with a much more in-depth explanation of the state park, what you will find there, whether it has beaches and lifeguards or walking trails or any historical sites. So it's something to think about when you're on your way to a distant day trip. If you want to stop somewhere for a picnic lunch, if you're taking the dog with you and he or she needs a little bit of a break and a walk, and there are so many state parks that offer us lots of opportunities. And as Helen said, make sure you check with your library. They may have a state park pass that you could borrow so that you get into all of these wonderful destinations for free for the day. Also, senior citizens, I believe it's over the age of 63, can get a state park pass dirt cheap. I think it's like $10 a year. Something to look into. I almost said look forward to, but it's right around the corner for me. Trustees of Reservations is a wonderful nonprofit organization that takes care of many of our cultural treasures in Massachusetts. Over 100 locations throughout the state, 27,000 acres, and many of them are former estates, just places of intense interest. You see the one all the way down there in Provincetown, Dunes Edge Campground. I camped there by myself for a week about 2 years ago, and it was spectacular. You could walk into Provincetown and enjoy the town and the restaurants and all of the fun stuff, or you could walk out the back of the campground and you were right in the dunes. And I did a long dunes hike all the way out to that very remote beach on the tip of P-Town. Just spectacular. So I love the trustees, and they're everywhere if you remember to look. Again, the library may have passes that will get you into some of their properties for free. Now, some of the destinations include the Crane Hill Estate in Ipswich, or Namkeeg in Stockbridge, which this year was offering wine walks where you have a glass of wine and you get to stroll around the grounds and talk to the curators and discuss the landscaping or other holdings there on that property. The trustees have really upped their game as far as special events. I used to talk a lot about a property on Route 3A in, I believe, Hingham, Cohasset. They're on the line, Turkey Hill, and the Whitney and Thayer Woods, where they were having food trucks one night a week, so that folks who were there to hike and enjoy the outdoors could hang out a little bit longer and enjoy dinner. At Land's End in Hingham, or World's End in Hingham, I'm sorry, it's a peninsula that juts into Boston Harbor, and they have a lot of special events. They have moonlight hikes, they have owl hikes, just some really cool events. But I always tell folks, check in advance, because you can't even park there to see about a ticket. They are so busy. You need to buy your ticket in advance and have it ready when you drive up, or you can't even stop at that location at World's End in Hingham. So the trustees are very, very popular, and for good reason. They have some lovely, lovely properties. Now, the Massachusetts Audubon has 60 different properties around the state. Please excuse my sloppy little outline of Massachusetts there. 40,000 acres of conserved land, a lot of nature programs, camps for kids, very family friendly. In fact, I think the next slide is going to show you one of my favorites, which is Wachusett Meadows in Princeton. I take my granddaughter, pictured here prominently, and they have, just wonderful spaces for kids to look at natural items like pine cones, to follow a map across the property, things to climb on. It's just wonderful, good old-fashioned outdoors, dirty, muddy fun. So now we'll move on to another one of my absolute favorite things in the world, which are rail trails. Massachusetts has a wealth of rail trails, including on this map, more than 70 in the state for 347 miles completed. And I'm going to back up again. Whoops, I thought that would back me up. No, that's taking me forward. Excuse me. I'm going to fix this because I want to talk about those maps. This map with the red kites on it show each of the rail trails, and the little lines, of course, show you the length of the rail trails, relatively speaking. You click on the little kite, it pops up with the name of the rail trail, how long it is, and its location. I have really begun to enjoy the rail trails out in my area. I currently live in Worcester. I was actually just walking on the Mass Central Rail Trail today in the Holden area with my sister, and it's beautiful. It's flat, very accessible in case folks have mobility issues. But you can check these maps and see what the surface material is, because sometimes, if they're not completely finished to stone dust, it can be uneven. Now somebody went and improved the Mass Trails map of rail trails by adding these blue kites that show open space in relation to the location of rail trails. So you can get on a rail trail and go visit open space areas, natural places, whether it's a state park or a town forest, and extend your trip. Now this picture, I mean, as you saw it already once, this picture is a little misleading because this is my daughter Andrea in the photo, and it's not a Massachusetts rail trail, but it's one very close by. It's the Blackstone Bikeway that is 18 miles long. It runs from Woonsocket all the way down to Providence, Rhode Island. And from there, you can connect to other bike paths. The one thing about the Blackstone Bikeway is it runs alongside the Blackstone River. There are historical sites to stop and visit along the way. And as the picture on the right shows, it's off-road. So you're in this rather protected bubble, nice paved surface, so you don't have to worry about hitting big ruts. I hope. I haven't inspected it yet this year, but it is a lovely, lovely trip. And I always add the disclaimer that I don't suggest that anybody hop on their bike and ride 18 miles or 36 miles if you haven't been riding all summer, but pick an interesting section that you would enjoy seeing. For instance, there is a drive-in theater on Route 146 in Smithfield. So maybe you'll do a section of the rail trail and then go to the drive-in for the evening and see a double feature. What else have we got? So now this is obviously the map of Massachusetts. If you see the blue arrow pointing out at Adams in the northwest corner of the state, that's where I will talk about a couple of different options about Mount Greylock, which has been a hiking destination since the 1840s. Isn't that amazing? I mean, Massachusetts was barely populated back then, but there were college students who wanted to get out into the woods and hike around and see what was out there. And it is still a favorite. It was actually the state's very first state park. And the elevation is 3,400 feet. It has this beautiful tower on the summit that has a little museum in the base of it. Very worth seeing. One thing about Mount Greylock that you might enjoy is that you don't have to hike to the summit. You can actually drive to the summit, park your vehicle, and then hike around the summit. That's very appealing to folks whose knees don't really support the heavy ascending and descending, excuse me, necessary in a lot of hiking. And, if you're pushing a stroller or something, why not go enjoy the views and even interpretive programs offered by the rangers. This state park has tremendous number of interpretive nature programs. I get constant reminders on Facebook of their ranger programs, everything from guided hikes to learning about the animals that live out there, the bugs, the weather, you name it. The Bascom Lodge is a gorgeous landmark at the top of the mountain, and it is the gathering place for a lot of the hikes and other programs. It's also a place that you can go visit if you're interested in an overnight stay, or if you just like to stop in for a meal. But the lodge in itself, as you can see from these pictures, is just stunning. Now, as I said, you can drive to the summit, which is that little curly Q on the green and white map on the left side of the screen with the P in it. You can drive to the summit. There are many other parking areas throughout the park, and do a short hike. There is a summit trail right there that will just take you around the top of the mountain, or you can follow the trails, for instance, on the red marked map on the lower right hand side of the screen, particularly if you're interested in tracking down some waterfalls. The Hopper Trail through Stony Ledge and March Cataract has campsites, but it's much more strenuous. And I always try to cushion my suggestions with look at the weather. If it's been dry, you're not likely to see a waterfall out there because they're just cascades. They don't have a dedicated source of water that's going to come, in a torrent all year long. New England is very seasonal. It's very up to how much rain we have because our waterfalls are mostly runoff. So out there on Mount Greylock, you're not going to get a Bash Bish Falls type of a waterfall. You're going to get a trickle, especially this late in the season, unless we've had downpours. And then there's mud to deal with. So keep it in mind. But I love to promote hiking as a transformational opportunity. I've been taking my kids hiking since they were quite young. They're all now in their 20s and 30s, but I hope to pass that along to them, that getting out of their normal environment where they feel stress or they're just tired all the time, and breathing the fresh air and seeing new sights and just being surrounded by greenery tends to lift your spirits, to release positive hormones in your system. That happened for Henry David Thoreau, a neighbor of Lexington, when he lived in Concord and he accidentally set his neighbor's bean field on fire and started a wildfire that burned something like 300 acres back in the 1830s or 1840s. He felt terrible about it, and he was, of course, kind of a pariah in town for a while. People were like, oh, here he comes again, that bad news Thoreau. So he went out to Mount Greylock and he hiked the mountain. And in his memoir, he spent a cold and lonely night sort of huddled in a hole in the ground, trying to get a little rest. And when he woke up in the morning, he was inspired to write these words. As the light increased, I discovered around me an ocean of mist, which by chance reached up to exactly the base of the tower and shut out every vestige of the earth. So for him, the hike up Mount Greylock lifted his spirits, sort of cleansed him. It was his penance for burning his neighbor's bean field, as I understand the story. And he felt transformed, and he went back to Concord and resumed his life. Every year, groups in that area do reenact Thoreau's hike in July. So if you want to get on the Berkshire Hiking Facebook page or ask a ranger at Mount Greylock about it, they do the one-day reenactment of Thoreau's hike. And I think it would be a lot of fun just to understand sort of what he was going through and what his state of mind was when he arrived versus when he departed. That's the best part of one of these micro adventures, is that it sort of refreshes you. It's a reset, and you get to go back to your normal life with fun memories, but not so much stress from an international trip or a long flight or anything like that. So these are some views from the summit. And again, Mount Greylock is a state park in the Adams area in Western Massachusetts. Now, if you go a little further north to North Adams, you can visit Massmoka, which is a converted mill site and is now a modern art and cultural magnet institution. It offers a lot of huge spaces for art installations. They do a lot of concerts and very interesting programming out there. I love the concept of some of these artistic interpretations. This artist created all of these handmade clay pots and put a certain amount of money in each and called it Forever in Your Debt. And she said that it was meant to represent student loan debt, which is very interesting. And as I said, since it was an old mill building, It has these giant windows and just expansive spaces for these enormous installations that you can really immerse yourself in when you go there. This artist, E.J. Hill, made a socio-political, physiological statement with his roller coaster made out of cardboard and a little bit of wood I see there. Fascinating stuff to go out and explore. And when you're in the area, you might want to put your bike on the bike rack and take it to the sometimes I can say this without stuttering, Ashuwillatukuk Rail Trail, which is on obviously a rail bed that runs through some really scenic areas between Pittsfield and North Adams. Lovely to see. You could also go a little further north into the northwest corner of the state to Williamstown, which is just a picture-perfect New England town, home of Williams College and the Clark Art Institute, where you may want to take in a program or visit the galleries, just do some hiking, or visit some farms maybe for the fall, pumpkin picking, who knows what they'll have in store for you. But Williamstown is really a beautiful little town to visit. Now in the Connecticut River area, the Northampton Springfield area, near Route 91, I prefer not to take the highway when I go out this way because 91 always seems to back up the minute I get on it. And then you just sit there and you're looking out the windows at this beautiful landscape around you, but you can't get off the highway. So I prefer to take Route 9 from a certain point out into the Amherst area, and then perhaps to Hadley. You have a lot of opportunities out here. It's in the Connecticut River Valley. The land is very, very flat, except for these prominent hills that just sort of poke up individually from the landscape, and they're fascinating to see just what makes these hills. They're probably just bedrock, sticking up out of the ground, but to me, just to get out there and see a different scenery is just lovely. The views are gorgeous. You can go up to Skinner State Park to the Summit House at 942 feet. This is the top of Mount Holyoke, where it was converted from a hotel into a state park. And then the Skinner House was completely renovated just a few years ago, I think in 2014. And the state park hosts things like sunset concerts in the summertime and probably some other special events, some fairs or festivals. It's a wonderful place to stop for a picnic or to have a little hike around and again, see those beautiful views of the river valley. This is a proposed hiking loop. It's 4.5 miles, which is significant, but who says you have to do the whole 4.5 miles? If you see Mount Holyoke, there is the top green dot in the top center of the page. If you just walk along that ridge, you get all of the beautiful scenery, a little bit of the exertion, but you don't have to do 4.5 miles of trails to enjoy it. And if Skinner State Park is too busy for you, go up the street just a little bit to Sugarloaf Summit, which is much less busy, has the same beautiful view, and bonus, is the site of Mel Gibson's movie Edge of Darkness, which I know dates me, but it'd be really fun to watch the movie and then go out and check this out and see if you can see where the scenes were shot. Also, Sugarloaf offers another beautiful opportunity to do a loop hike within sight of the river, or just a ridge hike if you so choose. Isn't that gorgeous? I mean, I always say to folks in Eastern Massachusetts, when we're hiking, we're usually under a canopy of trees and the greenery is lovely. But when you go to another place, like high in the mountains or out here in the Connecticut River Valley, and you go to much more open, expansive places, the sky takes on a whole new character. And you start to look up more and realize that, wow, we don't see the sky a whole lot in Eastern Massachusetts. It's a nice change. It's a beautiful place to visit. Now, Northampton is just down the road. I have many wonderful memories of Northampton from when my two youngest kids went to UMass in Amherst. However, I will suggest cruising through. There are always interesting things going on in Northampton. One time, my daughter and I took our bikes down the rail trail from Amherst to Northampton and came across a symphony of ukuleles in the town common, which was a lot of fun to watch. We also went to the farmers market there. I do understand that post-COVID, unfortunately, Northampton hasn't quite bounced back to its former self. There was a music hall that had national acts coming in and a lot more restaurants. I have not been there myself recently, but I'll just, sort of cushion my suggestions with go see, but be aware that things might have changed. If you do go to Springfield, which is not very far away, it's just a couple of exits down Route 91, you have an opportunity to visit any one of 5 different museums, plus the Dr. Seuss Memorial Sculpture Garden. Lots of opportunities there for cultural information. There's the 2 museums of fine arts, the Dr. Seuss Museum, Springfield Science Museum, and the Springfield History Museum, not to mention the Basketball Hall of Fame out there in Springfield. And for another opportunity to visit nature in that area, if you go a little further out Route 9, you go to the town of Chesterfield. You pass through several quaint little towns, but in Chesterfield, the Trustees of Reservations has Chesterfield Gorge, which is a beautiful place to hike. It's a deep ravine with a river rushing through it, and places that you can still see where a toll bridge used to span the river 100 years ago. You can see the spikes still in the rocks and some of the cables that held the bridge up. But it is a lovely hike, pretty flat and accessible, not to mention that on a hot day, all of that rushing water releases moisture into the air that cools things off, and you have the shade of the beautiful forest in the area. If you prefer something a little more active, you can try the Norwottuck Rail Trail that runs from Belchertown, which is east of Amherst, to Northampton, 11 miles each way. It crosses this wonderful restored railroad bridge on the Connecticut River, which is really cool. You see this bridge if you drive up and down Route 91 at all. It's really neat to cross it. The rail trail, of course, like all rail trails, is flat, goes through a lot of farmland in this area. My youngest and I used to ride it on our bikes quite a bit. From Amherst, as I said, out to Northampton, there was both a pancake breakfast place along the way for the route out, and on the way back, there was a little pub along the rail trail in Hadley that had all of these 1980s and 90s pinball machines. So she loved to stop in there and say, "Mom, do you remember playing this? Mom, do you remember how to play Pac-Man?" And I'd be like, I was never any good at Pac-Man, but I remember how to play. It usually eats me in like the first 5 seconds. But just the same, lots of fun stuff to find, to explore out there, whether it's by bike or by foot or driving. A little closer to home in north central Massachusetts is an area that I have enjoyed tremendously in the last couple of years. As I said, I've moved to Worcester to be near my grandchildren. and was never really familiar with central Massachusetts other than the apple picking opportunities in the fall, which are plentiful. But my daughter got into hiking and camping, and said, "Hey, let's go camp out at Tully Lake." And I said, "Geez, I'm not familiar with that." Well, it's an Corps of Engineers created, so man-made dammed lake, back created in the 1940s. Several lakes were created in this area of central Massachusetts in the 1930s and 40s. Another one I'll talk about in a minute is a little better known, but Tully Lake is kind of neat because when they dammed this river, they created a lake with a lot of little islands in it. So it's a fun place to go with a canoe if you have kids. It just breaks things up a little bit to paddle around islands, to get off and explore these they're just little hills with trees on them. The view right here is from Tully Summit, which is not too far from the lake itself, a little bit of a hike. And, again, gorgeous views of the sky, the clouds passing by, be a great place for a picnic. There is a very long 20-mile route if you so choose, but I like to center my activities around the lake down there in the lower right-hand corner. It's outlined in blue, and it actually has a hiking trail all the way around the lake. So if you were to go out with kayaks or canoe, or just out to check it out, you can hike all the way around, have a picnic. There are other trails in the area, one that leads to Doan's Falls, a very large waterfall that I think is at least 30 feet tall. That's really cool. This was actually our campsite at Tully Lake. It's a Trustees of Reservations property with at least 30 campsites. Almost all of them are waterfront, which is pretty unusual. It's a very well cared for property, really neat. You're so remote that you don't realize that you're not hearing any car traffic. You're not hearing, the usual hum of people around you or other activity. It's so lovely and tranquil out there. We brought our own canoe. It's sort of like paddle up camping, but you're not so far removed from home. It's just a little north of Athol. So if you've been out Route 2 to Athol and then up a little bit north to Tully Lake. Another thing, the trustees at the campsite, I believe they rent kayaks. I would call in advance to make sure it's something that's still available if you choose to do that, but it is a lovely opportunity. That way you don't have to lug all of that gear with you. In the area in general, Tully Lake is there, right sort of lower center part of the screen. It says Tully Lake Campground, but the blue lines connect several wildlife management areas, state parks. This whole area is pretty much wilderness due to those dams and the need for the large watershed area around those rivers. So where the red dot is on the right-hand side of the screen is Otter River State Forest. My daughter and I have camped there, and we found trails that will lead you into all of the rest of these wildlife management areas on the screen. You can ride a mountain bike or hike or trail run. I do believe that ATVs are probably allowed out there. I know snowmobiles are in the wintertime, but there's just so much property that is unpopulated, and these back roads, these dirt roads that are not public ways for vehicles, are accessible for people to go. I know hunting is allowed out there. I'll warn you about that, but just exploring in general is gorgeous. Doan's Falls, which I just mentioned, check on waterfall season to make sure that there's something flowing. Springtime is best, or after a big storm. a year or two ago, this is what it looked like by June. It was down to almost nothing, just a shadow of itself. So you want to think in advance about whether the waterfalls are going to be falling. But again, about the wilderness areas, wonderful opportunities to track wildlife. I love cross-country skiing. This is one of my absolute favorite areas to go. I could ski out there for hours and never see another person. And that is what I love to do. But I love to track wildlife, whether in the snow, as you can see the picture on the left, or when I remember to look up, things that you can see, like a heron rookery in a swampy area that you would otherwise never notice and have time to appreciate unless you get out to these areas and seek them out. Actually, I know that there's one near Route 2, right? Route 2 out toward the 495 area. There's a heron rookery in a swampy area, so not that far from Lexington. But this is a picture of the Millers River in the wintertime when I was out there skiing. Again, I just love the solitude and the beauty of it. Being able to get out there when nobody's around. The only thing left of the settlements that were there prior to the dams being created is this old cemetery in an area that used to be called New Boston. So you go and poke at the gravestones, and they were all prior to the 1940s. Why they decided to move all of the people out and all the houses out, but not the cemetery, I don't know. But it's kind of neat, kind of creepy. Another place where they moved all the people out was Quabbin Reservoir. Now, if you're familiar with this, it is the source of drinking water for many towns along the way from central Massachusetts all the way into Boston. The reservoir itself is 18 miles long and has 181 miles of shoreline. Much of that is accessible. And I will tell you about one area that I really enjoy visiting. So back in the 1920s and 30s, they decided that they would move all the people out of these 4 towns in central Mass, Dana, Greenwich, Enfield, and Prescott, that they would remove all of the buildings. They dug up all of the graves and relocated them. They tore up most of the roads, from what I understand. And then they dammed the Swifts River and allowed it to fill in this valley to create the Quabbin Reservoir. Now, there are people who will tell you that you can dive in the Quabbin Reservoir. You really can't, because swimming is not allowed, but you could dive in and swim into homes and churches and banks that are still there under the water. But I'm here to tell you that's not true. That's a great urban myth. If you look at the top left-hand picture here, that is the before picture with all of the trees and the farms and the little villages. The middle picture is obviously, even the trees were cut down. All of the buildings were razed, moved out of there. The roads, all human habitation. And then the lower picture is the current scene where the water has filled back in where these towns used to be. So the picture on the right-hand side of the screen with the buildings is the town of Dana at the town common. And it's easily accessible, wonderful, wonderful fall hike to take. You go out to the town of Petersham, which on this map is sort of toward the upper right, just below the pink writing. And you take Route 32A south to Nishawag, and there are big gates. Like state parks have those big metal gates to block dirt roads. There's a big gate. It's gate 40. It's well marked. There's parking. You park your vehicle there and hike past the gate. I believe it's okay to take a bicycle, but you didn't hear that from me. It's only 2 miles into the town common at Dana, and then another 2 miles to the shoreline. I encourage you to take the extra 2 miles, make it an 8 mile round trip, because going to the edge of the water is really cool. You're on a road that just sort of disappears into this huge body of water, and it starts to sink in that, wow, this was once an active village where people lived, and it had to be sacrificed for the drinking water for Boston. So it's really neat. When you go to the town common of Dana, they have plaques that show you those buildings that used to be there and describe what the town was like a little bit. As I said, a wonderful fall hike, even winter time if you're into, say, cross country skiing or snowshoeing. The hike into the town center is very flat. The hike from the town center out to the edge, to the shoreline, is a little bit hillier, but not hard to do. So also in Central Mass, now that we leave all of the dams and watershed areas and back to terra firma, Route 2 has a plethora of vintage shops and antique shops. If you go a little further west from Route 2 on 202 or Route 2A, you get into those small country towns, and where they have the barns, the antique barns. It's a lot of fun to stop in and explore. We had a couple of rainy days when we camped out there at Tully Lake, and this is something my daughter and I did. We went into Athol, ate at a fantastic Mexican restaurant, highly recommended, right on the center Main Street in Athol. Stopped at the town library, which is beautiful, newly renovated, had lots of kids' activities going on in the summertime. And then we hit a few of these antique barns along the way out west until my grandchildren fell asleep in the back seat. And then we had to head back to the wet campsite. But this is a good time to remind you that if you're inclined to poke around old stuff, Brimfield is a wonderful opportunity. There's another version of Brimfield coming up just in another week or so, September 5th through the 10th. It's an antique fair, but way more than antiques. Weird, wacky collectibles, interesting stuff to look at, just to traipse around and poke at these things and wonder, where they came from or what's the history behind them. Brimfield is a great Massachusetts tradition for its antique fairs out there in the Sturbridge area. And so when you're on a Central Mass road trip, whether you're apple picking or going to Brimfield, stop at the farm stands, see what they have to offer. These people work very hard to produce wonderful fruits and vegetables for us. And sometimes you find heirloom apples, the ones you don't find in your average grocery store. I remember I stopped at this Stillman family farm market and found like these black pea pods. They were delicious in stir fry. Or you can go to the town of Harvard and visit the Fruitlands Museum, which was the site of Louisa May Alcott's family's utopian village, attempt at a utopian village. It lasted, 6 to 8 months. I just took my mom there a week or so ago, and it was very interesting. There are 3 different museums on site. There's the home where the Alcotts lived. This was actually Louisa May's father's utopian vision. His name was Bronson Alcott. The farmhouse that they lived in is down at the bottom of the hill. The Native American Museum is not currently open. It has been closed to sort of reinterpret the collection through the eyes of actual Native Americans instead of sort of Hollywoodized view of Native Americans. And then there is an early American art museum. There's also a nice cafe on site. So lots to do, worth a stop, beautiful, beautiful views, especially as the trees change color. So also in central Massachusetts, you might want to visit in the Brookfields. In this, I believe this is in Brookfield, not West Brookfield, is White's Landing, which is on Route 148 at the Quabog River. White's Landing, it's the red destination dot there in the center of the screen, is a nondescript building that you might just drive by and not think anything about it, but it is a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving the history of the area. And so they offer not just a place to stop and grab some lunch, but they have canoe and kayak rentals. You can explore the Quabog River. There are some events on site, and it's a place in the river where some of the very earliest European settlers landed, and they used to ford the river there, whether there was a little ferry or a shallow spot where they could wade across, I'm not sure. I think probably a ferry, being called a landing, of course, but it has a very interesting history in this area. It's where many of the descendants of the first European settlers in Massachusetts came to start farms. You know, it's a fertile area. Of course, we still have a lot of farming in the area, those apple orchards. But these settlers came out. Of course, they sort of moved the Native Americans off the land by force or persuasion. The Native Americans did not like that. And back in the early or mid 1600s, there was actually a massacre called the Massacre of the Haymakers, where the Native Americans attacked some of the farmers, and there was bloodshed here. So there are many historical plaques along the road in this area. I believe that Washington's army even came and stayed in this area at one point in time. So it's very rich in history, but we tend to think of Boston as the seat of revolutionary history in Massachusetts. But there was lots going on out here in the Brookfields. So when you do your apple picking this fall, stop in, check things out, rent a canoe, enjoy a little paddle on the Quabog. And again, beautiful vistas of the wide open sky above you. I just love that. Take your bug spray. Speaking of waterways, Massachusetts has over 5,000 miles of rivers and brooks. Yet just a few are designated wild and scenic. No, I was wrong. I'm reading my cue card now. 8,000 miles of rivers and brooks. Only 147 of those miles are designated wild and scenic, which means they're free of impoundments like dams. And of course, the fish can spawn, but they need to be primitive and inaccessible, at least in part. So two in Massachusetts that meet these criteria are the Nashua River, which is near the New Hampshire line. It runs up through Pepperell and Groton, and the Taunton River, which is down in southeastern Mass, which runs, of course, through Taunton and empties into Mount Hope Bay in Rhode Island. So those are our wild and scenic rivers. Now, how do you access them? Well, Nashua has a rail trail that runs alongside the river from Ayr through Groton and Pepperell, 11 miles one way, runs through a beautiful state forest along the way. And in, I believe it's Groton, there is Neshoba Paddlers. I'm getting my biking and kayaking mixed up. Neshoba Paddlers rents canoes and kayaks to go explore the river itself. Again, you don't have to lug your own gear. And the Nashua River Watershed website has section maps of the river so that you don't go down the wrong leg of the river and get separated from the rest of your party. Again, great opportunity to use your GPS tracker to make sure you're in the main flow of the river and not off on one of these little cutoffs. Neshoba Paddlers offers instruction. They have special events, guided tours of the river as well. And if you're in the area and you want to stop by Gibbet Hill, which looks like a cool place for a picnic, or I was thinking, you know, graduation pictures or prom pictures. Route 40 in Groton is the site of this former estate that was built around the turn of the 20th century, unfortunately burned down, is now town property. And again, just neat to explore, to check out. Would love to go up there with my grandkids and read Rapunzel's story and have my granddaughter, you know, understand what it's like to be at the top of a tower, or maybe a dragon story. It looks enough like a castle, doesn't it? So I'm going to have to talk really fast to get through all of my material in the next 5 minutes. People often ask, you know, state parks, where do I like to go? Down on the Rhode Island line in Douglas is Wallam Lake at Douglas State Forest. It's an enormous reservation with over 5,700 acres, lots of trails. The Mid-State Hiking Trail, which goes through Massachusetts, north to south or south to north from Connecticut to New Hampshire, runs through this property. There are the former Snet Rail Trail. Riverbed runs through. Some of it's improved, some of it is not. It's okay on a mountain bike, like the bike pictured here, but it also has the tri-state marker. So you find the main trail out in the woods, and there's a sign for the tri-state marker, and you do a little hike up into the woods. And it's neat with kids to ask them to figure out how they can be in 3 states at once. Will they climb on top of the marker? Will they try to wrap themselves around it? Who knows? They'll let them be creative and outdoors. My creativity one fall a couple of years ago was trying to ride my bike the entire length of the Southern New England Trunk Trail, the Snet Trail, which is improved in some towns like Franklin and Blackstone, but as you get out toward Douglas, you're riding in the woods on this old riverbed that is completely unimproved. But it was neat. It was 22, 24 miles. It was a nice little adventure for me. So also in that part of the state is Purgatory Chasm State Park, which was very popular when I was a kid. It's a big ravine where all of these boulders have tumbled down and you can go climb on them. There are big cracks in some of the rocks and you try to squeeze through. Very recently, I was told by a ranger that they were making a universally accessible platform. So anyone with mobility issues could come to the top of the ravine on this platform and overlook this 50 or 60 foot deep area with all of these boulders and people climbing on them, and you know, have a little more participation, if you will. There are many other paths throughout the park itself, but the main attraction is the rocks in the center. And after you've done a little bit of hiking, you may want to go to West End Creamery, which is nearby if you're on Route 146 South. Purgatory Chasm is to the west and West End Creamery is to the east, basically on the same exit. They do a corn maze, they make their own ice cream, and they have mini golf. These are some pictures from a quick stop at Purgatory last spring, I believe. My friend John here squeezing through one of the cracks in the rocks. It's lots of fun if you don't have any claustrophobia. So now in the North Shore, a quick trip down the Ipswich River, 35 miles long. I suggest you, and I don't, get any benefit from saying this, but again, instead of lugging all of your own equipment, you can go up to Foot Brothers Canoe and Kayak Rentals, leave your car there. They will drive you and a watercraft of your choice, whether it's a canoe or a kayak, to the starting point, and you can drift or paddle down river. The last time I did this, you did need to have good water shoes because you had to get out of your boat every now and then and pull it over a beaver dam and get back in to continue your trip down. But you can see you do circle, or you go right through actually Bradley Palmer State Park, which is pictured here. Beautiful state park, very, very popular on the North Shore. It's adjacent to Willowdale State Park, which enables a lot of mountain biking and hiking and trail running throughout both parks. Again, if you're on the Ipswich River, you cruise right under this driveway bridge to the old estate. Bradley Palmer was a very well-to-do attorney in Massachusetts back around 1910, and he built this estate out of a purchase of 700 acres because he wanted a place to ride his horses. So he was a founding partner of the Palmer and Dodge law firm in Boston way back when. And when he died, he left it to the state of Massachusetts. So his beautiful estate now belongs to you and me, and we are entitled to visit. There are ranger tours, both of the architecture, which is gorgeous, of his former home, and tours of the exterior features as well. So I think I'm out of time. I can take a look at any questions. I wasn't able to wrap everything up. I wanted to suggest going to the Boston Harbor Islands National Park. A beautiful place to visit, especially if you have guests from out of town and you want to take them somewhere new and unique. The season for that, I think, runs into October. You can go take a boat out of downtown Boston around Rose Wharf to Peddocks Island, and to Peddocks has hiking trails, and oh my goodness, I have to look at my slide. George's Island has the old Civil War fortress, 7 miles offshore, really fun to explore. Definitely a unique place to visit. I just want to take a quick look at any questions. Oh, wonderful. Thank you for adding links to all of the places I mentioned. And I'll remind you again, great museum passes available at your library, probably trustees or reservation passes. Have I tried the Blue Hill Trail from the Quincy side to the Elliott Tower? Quincy side, I have hiked extensively in the Blue Hills, but I'm trying to remember the Quincy side to the Elliott Tower. My goodness, I don't know. I'll have to refer you to my hiking book, to the best day hikes near Boston. I'm sorry, I can't remember that hike specifically to tell you how long it would take. It also depends an awful lot on a person's physical ability and whether you're trying to get kids to keep up with you or to slow down for you. A lot of hikes go as slowly as 1 mile per hour. So keep that in mind when you plan any big outings.
Thank you, Allison. I think that was the only question. There was one other person who had raised their hands, but I think they had to go. So if anyone has any questions that they want to ask Allison, please do. In the meantime, I just wanted to thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. There are certainly some sites that I've never been to, and so I look forward to going, and especially you've kind of shared some that you could go to now where you could still do the paddle boarding and the canoeing, but also you shared some that you could go to during the fall and even in the winter. I mean, you know, the cross-country skiing is great activity. Looks like there's a question that popped up. Any favorite places to go that are accessible?
You mean universally accessible? You know what? I have suggested to the Appalachian Mountain Club to do an entire book on accessible outdoor spaces. Unfortunately, they haven't taken us up on that yet. I believe that much of George's Island here has accessibility, that you take the ferry across and there are no stairs involved in getting on shore and exploring some of the property. There's not a lot of hills either. I'm just thinking off the top of my head what's right in front of me. I really wish that we could have added accessibility to the hiking book, but as I said, the Appalachian Mountain Club wasn't quite ready for that yet. A great place to go out in Western Mass that's accessible is the Bridge of Flowers. That there are a lot of, I'm trying to think what the name of the town is. Shelburne Falls in Western Mass. The Bridge of Flowers is an old railroad bridge that was only used for like 6 years. And now the town makes it a tourist destination by adding all sorts of beautiful blossoms throughout the summer months. So that's a wonderful place to go that's accessible. I wish I could think of some more.
Yeah, I think they were referring to wheelchair access.
Yeah.
So
That's what I meant by the Bridge of Flowers.
mhm.
Or I would check in advance for something like George's Island and the Boston Harbor Islands. But I believe there probably is, since it's a national park, there's probably some aspect of accessibility there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you again, Allison. Have a good evening, everyone. Take care.
Have a great fall. Thank you.
Thank you.